Well, as they say about life, all roads lead to a final destination. In Photoshop, we have all kinds of final destinations. This chapter is not about printing, it's about output, and that output depends on your intent. So let me use a Stephen Covey expression, begin with the end in mind. When you open an image in Photoshop at the very beginning, your intent, you need to know that. You need to know where you're going with the image so you can design toward that goal. Now let's say we've got this image and I've opened this one up and it is number 26_2508094 PSD. It is in your exercise file. It's from our friends at Photospin, but I've done a little modification to it. I've added an extra layer, and that's just to help us out when we start saving because some options change based on single or multiple layers. So we're ready. We like this image and we want to save it. So what do? Well, I think you know this, but let's look at some of our options. Let's go up to the word File on the pull-down menu. Now, since this one has been saved once already, clicking Save is not going to do much more than just save it in the same format. So let's go to Save As. In Save As, let me state the obvious here. For example, given a name that makes sense, I'm not sure if that name makes sense, but that's the name of this file on the Photospin website. I might call this Tahiti or wherever it was taken. So number one, give it a name that makes sense. And number two, another obvious thing, put it somewhere where it makes sense. We all have large storage systems with hundreds and thousands of folders, and I've got a lot of folders called Stuff. Put it somewhere where it makes sense. This stuff up here, if you're working on a Windows system, it's going to look a little bit different. Let's not worry about that. Let's worry about our formats down here. This one right here, Photoshop, to me, is a very universal one. And there's a lot of reasons why you might want to save it as a Photoshop document. I'm not really sure what I'm doing yet with this image. I don't know what it's going to grow up to be. It might go out on the internet. It might go into PowerPoint. Might go to a 4-color press. I'm really not sure. Save it as a PSD. The PSD format, besides being native to this program, can be switched into anything you want. In fact, I would recommend to most people who work in Photoshop a lot is you should have your original document as a PSD. And I usually recommend that people, when they bring in other formats, change that format to the PSD before you begin working on it, because since PSD is native to Photoshop, it works faster. Now, you do have options down here if you have any of these things, like you could save it as a copy. Do you have any alpha channels? On this one, we don't. Notes or spot colors. Do you want it with layers or without? It's up to you. And embedding the color profile. We'll talk about that in another lesson in this chapter. So you have these options to saving it as a Photoshop document. I would also recommend that if you're working in the Adobe family, like InDesign or Adobe Illustrator, they love this format. And when you do that, not only do they love the format, but it makes sure and it guarantees you're going to get everything. Drop shadows, transparency, just about anything you want. So that's a good format to have. Another one down here is called a large document format. I'll just mention that. It's been there for a while. It allows you to save the document in Photoshop with the width and height of up to 300,000 pixels. So if you're working on large documents, that's a good format to know you've got. EPS, this one right here, Encapsulated PostScript, is really good, especially if you're going out, say, to a press, 4-color presses, because it does a couple of things. Number one, it really saves color information accurately for the press, but it also allows for the incorporation in the same document of raster and vector. So you've been playing around with the pen tool. You've got text. You want that text to be vector and not raster. This would be a good format to use. It's also very friendly to Adobe Illustrator. The Photoshop EPS format. You've got a couple of new ones down here, stereo, JPEG, and multi-picture format. What are those? Ever take those double images and put them into the stereo viewers where you've got two images slightly off, and when you look at them, they look three-dimensional? These are the formats for that. Now, it does require some additional software. You can explore the internet, have some fun with this. Might be good to do a whole lesson on this. Making stereo images and then saving them is very easy in Photoshop, but it does require some additional software. You have an additional one down here for Photoshop as in 2.0. That just allows you to go back in Photoshop way back in time if you would ever need that. That's just there for legacy purposes. I doubt if too many people actually use that one. You've got PNG. Now let me mention the PNG. PNG is the native format for Microsoft Office. If you're working in PowerPoint and you're saying to yourself, oh, these images don't look all that great, or when they open and I do like a transitional effect in PowerPoint, and it looks a little bit kind of like jagged, or it looks like it's kind of coming in like it's nervous. It's not coming in very smooth. PNG is the format designed to work with these programs. And if you use the PNG format in programs like PowerPoint, your images will always look great, and you'll get compliments on everything. Let's stop and look at TIFF. The TIFF format is a very universal format. Think of it this way. Well, Andy, I'm not working in the Adobe family. And what I need here is a format that I can work on Mac or Windows, and basically doesn't hurt the image or harm it when it saves it. And just about anything, Quark Express, Microsoft Publisher, whatever, will open this image up. Then I would recommend TIFF. Even InDesign will take and open up a TIFF file. But you have some interesting options for TIFF. So let's go ahead and pretend like we're saving this one as a TIFF. Let me go ahead and click Save. In the TIFF options, number one, you have image compression. You have none, LZW, zip, and JPEG. Now, LZW and zip are what are called lossless compression methods. In other words, they will make the file smaller while it sits on your hard drive, but they won't harm it. The problem is, though, for example, does the other side have the equipment or the software to open it back up again? Not all zip programs are created equal. So if you decide to zip it and then you give it to somebody else and they can't open it, you may have to go through the whole process again. And JPEG, of course, is lossy. So you've got a TIFF option with a lossy compression method. In other words, remove color information to make it smaller. I usually leave it at none. I'm not as concerned with file sizes as I was years ago. We all have a lot of storage space. Even bandwidth on the internet is pretty fast to move things around. So I usually try to leave that off, but that's just me. Now, pixel order, you've got interleaved or per channel. Interleaved is considered pretty much the standard in the industry. Per channel will actually run the files a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient, but not all applications support per channel. I would suggest, unless you know for sure what you're doing, where it's going, leave it at interleaved, you'll be fine. Byte order, to me, is legacy. It used to be very important that you go to Macintosh or IBM, because it wouldn't open if you didn't do that. I've never found a file that I've opened on a Mac or a PC that I can't open no matter which one of those I use, but since Macintosh is minority and IBM PC is the majority, I would suggest leave that at IBM PC, whether you're on a Mac or not. It's not going to hurt a thing. Save Image Pyramid allows you to create multi-resolution images, so you can open them at different resolutions. If we had transparency, we'd have that option. Now, we do have two layers over here, so it's asking us what we want to do. Do you want to run RLE? That stands for Run Length Encoding. What RLE does is it will give you a faster save, but the files are a little bit bigger. Zip, again, I'm not a big fan of zip, but slower saves and smaller files, or I don't want any layers at all. Just go ahead and click here. Now I'm going to leave that at RLE. That's the default. So when you click OK, you can save the file. Let me come back up here again and go into Save As. Now, of all these different options that we have, PNGs, all these different options, there are two more down here I'll just mention really quick. They're called DCSs, Digital Color Separation. If you're going out to a press, it's very possible your operator may ask you to save your image as a DCS. Now, what is that? It saves actually 5 files. It saves a cyan, magenta, yellow, and black plate image and a composite with all the image mixed together so the press operator can see it. Now, in my experience working with 4-color presses, they usually ask me to save it as either an EPS or say as a PSD or even a TIFF, and they make the separation. And the reason being is they know more about their equipment and what they need to do. Now, the DCS-1 is for kind of like older presses. The DCS-2 is for newer presses and digital presses. And if you work in the 4-color industry, you know this already. So saving a file, if you're not sure what you're going to do with it, I'd recommend leaving it as a PSD. Everything else is determined by what you're planning on doing with the image. But You want to save on a regular basis, and you want to save often, just in case something happens. So saving a file is a very important part of what we're doing because saving determines intent. On to the next.